Hi, Sam.
I'm trying to adjust the lighting here for Daryl a little bit.
Get lighting, get craft services, get all the personal assistants in there, everything a commissioner deserves.
Yeah. Jay, I like the, what do you call it? Beard?
It just makes me look older. That's what my dad said.
Wiser.
Why do you want to look old?
Wiser.
Right? That's what I'm going for.
Okay.
Is that better?
I think so, yeah.
Sunita, since we're gonna be together, I don't have your email address, Sunita. Can I send?
So
Mine-
we're in a live meeting right now. So Commissioner Regier, I can get that to you tomorrow. So I just want to remind folks.
Yeah, I didn't want her to tell me. I just thought,
Okay.
I think I just sent you an email the other day.
oh, okay.
Do we have all our commissioners?
Yes, we do, Chair.
Okay. Let us, okay. Let me bring up my agenda. Commissioner Savage, it all starts moving a lot slower at 8:30. It all starts moving a lot slower. All right. First of all, I want to thank publicly thank Commissioner Tutorial, because in December I started framing a letter on hate crimes, identifying hate incidents, and the initial plan was to send it out to all of the people on the commission, get a written vote. I was informed that we can't do that. That's not legally how we can run a business, as we can run a commission in the city or the state of California. But I'm grateful for that. It was fortunate because Commissioner Theriault actually had the opportunity to attend some really informative sessions on hate crimes, and she was able to recraft the letter. Her further prompting of me has allowed us to have two very special presentations tonight. First of all, we're going to hear from the Palo Alto Police. We'll have Officer Reichschneider give a presentation, and staff has informed me that the chief will actually be on for part of it to talk about a statement that the Palo Alto PD released on hate crimes today, or at least the chief released on hate crimes today. Following that up, we also will have the Santa Clara County Chief Assistant District Attorney, Jay Borsky, who is a Palo Alto resident, lifelong advocate against hate crimes, and he will talk about the efforts that the county is doing with its new hate crime unit. And then next month, we'll have two community organizations organizations come in and do a similar piece, but I think it is important. We did not plan this, given the incident that happened last night in Atlanta. We definitely did not plan this, but I think this is a conversation that definitely needs to happen now. So at this time, I would like to invite Palo Alto PD forward. Officer Reichschneider, are you there?
Reverend Smith, I am here. I know that the chief wanted to make a brief remark. If he's here, I'll invite him, as I always would, the chief to go first, if he'd like.
Sure. Thank you, James. Good evening, Reverend Smith, members of the HRC and the broader community as a whole. I wanted to thank all of you for the opportunity for us to be here with you tonight to give you an update on hate crimes and hate incidents, which Captain Reifschneider will do. But as the chief of the Palo Alto Police Department, I did want to take the opportunity to reassure not only you, but the entire community of our commitment to responding to any and all incidents involving hate within Palo Alto. This is a crime we've always made a priority and will continue to do so. And as you just mentioned, Reverend Smith, the recent hate crimes against the Asian American Pacific Islander communities across our country, we want to let all the residents know that with these recent wave of crimes, that we stand with you against hate and bigotry. And as you mentioned, the tragic loss of life during that mass shooting in Georgia yesterday, a majority of the victims were of Asian descent, and our hearts go out with every one of them and all the individuals who've been traumatized by these events. Palo Alto is a very diverse community, and I have no doubt that these recent events are contributing to greater anxiety and even increasing thoughts of fear within our community. And the Palo Alto Police Department is committed to protecting each and every one of you, maintaining your safety, and be there for you in time of need. So I want to reemphasize to never, ever hesitate to reach out if you have concerns or fear, to give us a call. I want to thank you. And on behalf of all the chiefs within the county, the letter that you mentioned, we all signed it in collaboration with each other in support of our community and to pronounce our dissatisfaction with what's happening to our community right now. So with that, I want to thank you again for the opportunity to address you, and I'll turn it over to Captain Reifschneider for the update.
Thank you, Chief. I will be attempting to share my screen, so if you'll bear with me as I get out on the tightrope for that, I will attempt to get that moving here. So bear with me for one moment. So I'm hoping you all are looking at my screen there. And if I could get a thumbs up, a friendly smile, or there we go, a confirming scowl will even do. The invitation tonight, which as the chief said, I very much appreciate to come speak, was to address some informational items on hate crimes in Palo Alto, hate crimes in general. There were some questions about what really is a hate crime, the legal definition that is, versus an incident that may not be a crime, but is nevertheless disturbing. Some questions about, are they trending up? What types of hate crimes do we experience most typically in Palo Alto? What is our response to those types of crimes? And I think lastly, the question was, what type of training do our officers receive in response and investigation to hate crimes? So I'm going to endeavor to hit all of those things tonight. For those that I have not met before, I am Acting Captain Reifschneider. I'm assigned to the Patrol Division at the Police Department. I've worked here since 2005. And I actually, as one or a couple of you may recall, I had the pleasure of addressing this same group, although with different commissioners mostly, almost 6 years ago on this very same topic. So on the one hand, it's sad that things are, that things in the world are still such that this is a topic we have to talk about, right? But I'm glad to be back to be able to talk to you about it. So again, as I said, we'll move on to talking about some definitions, applicable laws under California law, talk about data here in Palo Alto, as well as some recent examples of incidents that we can use to help us kind of talk through what we're doing. So without further ado, we'll move into hate crimes as defined. And bear with me as I work through a technical difficulty here. So under California law, hate crime has a very specific definition that you're looking at there. It's defined as a criminal act committed in whole or in part because of one or more of the following actual or perceived characteristics of the victim. And you'll see there's quite a list there: disability, gender, nationality, race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or association with a person or a group that has one of those characteristics. So that's the very broad definition under California law of what a hate crime is. You'll note there that very importantly, one of the first few words is you need an underlying criminal act. And so we'll get to that in just a moment. So the next thing we're going to talk about is a hate incident as contrasted with a hate crime. So the U.S. Department of Justice provides us with what I think is a good working definition of a hate incident versus a hate crime. And that is an act of prejudice or acts of prejudice that are not crimes and do not involve violence, threats, or property damage. So in layman's terms, I would simply say they're troubling acts that are motivated or appear to be motivated by prejudice or hate, but do not actually constitute a crime that would be prosecutable. So under California law, as I said, there's first off 422.55, which is what gives us our definition of hate crimes that we just talked about. There's 422.6, which creates a standalone misdemeanor charge that can be used in the event of a hate crime. But 422.6 also has a requirement that there be criminal force or criminal threat or property damage that constitutes a crime. So there we are back to the fact that we still have to have, for a hate crime to occur, we don't just need the motivation, we need a crime plus motivation. 422.7 provides an enhancement in certain types of instances of a hate crime, mostly where the person is a repeat offender or where the damage or act is particularly egregious. But you'll note that those two standalone offenses for hate crimes under California law are both misdemeanors. 422.75 is different in that it does not create a standalone crime or offense for a hate crime. What it is it's a sentencing enhancement that can be imposed upon someone who's convicted of a felony crime that's determined to have been motivated by hate. So it's not a standalone offense, it's something that is tacked on at the end once someone's convicted of the underlying criminal offense. So that's your law in California that specifically addresses hate crimes, defines it, and provides us with some guide points, both for charging as well as for sentencing. However, we can't stop there because, as I said, we need an underlying criminal offense. And in some cases, those will be misdemeanors, and in some cases, those will be felonies, but we need one of those offenses in order to charge. So while, of course, this list is not exhaustive, here is a list of what we would normally see as the most common underlying crimes that would be ultimately charged or could be charged as a hate crime. There's PC 422, used to be referred to as terrorist threats, now referred to as criminal threats. 422 is what we call in California a wobbler, which essentially means that the district attorney's office can charge it as either a misdemeanor or a felony based on specific circumstances. In order for someone to commit a criminal threat, they have to willfully threaten to inflict either death or great bodily injury on someone. They have to intend that the threat be taken seriously, and it has to be so unequivocal, so unconditional, so immediate, and so specific that it's credible under the circumstances. So a good example would be if someone you knew to be residing in another country called you and said, I'm going to come over and inflict great bodily injury on you tonight. That would not be a credible threat that we could charge as a criminal threat, because they're not in a position to actually carry out the offense they're threatening to commit. Also, you have to be able to prove sustained fear on behalf of the victim. So if the victim didn't take the threat seriously, then it can't be charged as a criminal threat. One of the other common ones we see, in fact, the most common one we see here in Palo Alto is vandalism, which is under Penal Code Section 594. Vandalism can be charged as either a misdemeanor or a felony, or even less than that as an infraction, based on the nature of the damages. So the dollar value of the damage inflicted. So if we're talking a couple $100s or less in damages, the DA's office has the discretion to charge that as a mere infraction. And the only thing that would be in place would be a fine. If damages are $400 or more, typically it's a misdemeanor, or excuse me, between $250 and $400, it would be a misdemeanor. And damages in excess of $400 are typically charged as felonies. As I said, those don't take into account any kind of enhancement that might be applied later if the underlying offense is a hate crime. So in other words, a misdemeanor vandalism cannot be, and I'll let DA Boyarsky clarify, but I don't believe can be given a sentencing enhancement to make it a felony because the underlying offense is a misdemeanor. On the other hand, if someone commits a felony act of vandalism, then they can in fact have that sentencing enhancement added on at the end, which can potentially add up to 3 years of additional imprisonment. 594.3, I want to point out, is a subsection of the vandalism statute, and it provides for additional penalties for vandalism involving a place of worship. So that one can actually be charged as a felony, even if the damages are less than $400. So there is a particular consideration in the law for vandalism aimed at places of worship. The last one I thought I'd touch on is just our simple battery section. Simple meaning misdemeanor. Essentially what we're talking about is willfully and unlawfully using force on someone else or violence on someone else. And so that would be an underlying offense we sometimes see, coupled with a threat or motivation of hate. So let me provide you with some contextual statistics for Palo Alto, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail. So the stats at the top, you'll see 2006 through 2015. Those were actually the stats that I prepared that'll cover about a 10-year period. And you'll see there were 36 total hate crime reports completed during that 10-year period, which gives you approximately 3.6 on any given year. In 2016, and I broke out the last 5 full years individually for your reference, we had 7. 2017, we had 3. I've added the category of incidents beginning in 2017 because honestly, we weren't tracking them separately before then. And I think that it's important that we track incidents, even though they're not crimes, because they can potentially escalate to criminal behavior later, or they can give us some insight of trends or areas that we need to pay particular attention to. So we do complete police reports if we have information to do so, but they're not categorized as a criminal report or as a hate crime. So the number you're seeing on the left is the hate crime report number, and then I've parsed out the incident reports as appropriate. 2018, 5, 2019, 3, 2020, 6, and so far year to date in 2021, 1. Now, I want to pay particular attention to calendar year 2020 because I'm sure that's of most interest to the panel. So I want to break out those 6 that we completed criminal reports regarding. 2 of them were vandalisms, one being a racial slur that was graffitied on a city sign, another being the vandalism of a yard sign where material was actually permanently glued or affixed to the sign, so it constitutes damage that would be a vandalism. 2 of those reports were thefts of yard signs. 2 of those were criminal threats. One of those criminal threats cases involved a dispute between a bus driver and a bus passenger, during which the passenger made a threat of inflicting injury on the driver and used a slur during the threat. The second involved a road rage incident where there was a road rage dispute and one of the drivers made a threat against the other, again using a slur during the threat. The 2 incidents that are noted there both refer to what I'll call tampering with yard signs. And why I say tampering versus damage or vandalism is where something hasn't actually caused any damage or defacement. It's very, very difficult to charge that as a vandalism. Nonetheless, we documented those cases where we were contacted by a victim sign owner who wanted to pursue a police report. I should add for full context though, because I have reviewed the letter that Reverend Smith referenced earlier and the attachments to that letter. We were made aware in the fall of a number of other incidents that most of which or all of which appeared to be incidents as opposed to crimes. We were made aware of them third hand or second hand, typically through social media or through intermediaries, including the commission here. And so we tracked all of those to keep an eye on whether there were geographic areas in town that we needed to pay particular attention to, and to keep an idea or to keep a good idea of the size or scope of the issue. But we were not contacted by the particular owners of the property or the people who experienced the incident firsthand. So our ability to document them is limited in that regard.
Excuse me?
Yes, of course.
2020 numbers, quick question. I noticed there was no mention of First Congregational Church having their Black Lives Matter sign ripped down and University also being sprayed over. How do we determine that those 2 cases are not hate-based when the congregations obviously felt they were hate-based?
Great question. So we did document the theft of the sign, and I'm sorry, I actually, when I said 2 yard signs, one of the signs that I was referring to under the theft heading there was actually the theft of the sign there off of Embarcadero. So that one was documented as a hate crime theft. The incident you're referring to downtown, I assume we're referring to the wheat paste posters that were affixed to the pavement on University and then were subsequently painted upon. That case was particularly problematic for a couple of reasons. One was that the folks affixing the wheat paste, they never contacted us at all and did not wish to be involved. The second item that complicates that is, while they may very well have considered what they were doing public art and have been well-intentioned in what they were doing, they were affixing things to the public roadway without a permit and without any kind of art commission process or otherwise. So when they affix something to the middle of a roadway and then someone comes along and marks on it, the question becomes, well, is there actually a vandalism being committed or not? Because it's public property, and the wheat paste posters themselves were not commissioned or authorized by the city to be placed there. So we did document that incident and take a police report. And we did contact the person who was out there painting on them and deal with that person and document the incident. But as far as charging that as a vandalism, for the reasons I mentioned, it was problematic for a variety of reasons, even after we consulted with the DA's office. Does that answer your question, Reverend?
Yes, that's a good start. Thank you.
So I do want to talk about things in the news because obviously they're on all of our minds right now. And I'll actually use the incident in Atlanta yesterday as a great example. I don't claim to know any more about it than anyone else on this call. In fact, it may be that people on this call may have read more updated news than I have. But I think that it's an interesting case because clearly the suspect there was motivated by hate, but it's very, very early in the investigation to know at whom that hate was directed. Was it a gender-based hate because the victims were predominantly female? Was it an Asian-based hate because the majority of the victims were Asian? I don't think we know that yet. And so it's just an illustration of sometimes the difficulty of identifying the motive. And I think that what DA Boyarsky is likely to talk about, because I've heard him say it before, is that hate crimes are unique in the penal code in that they're one of the very, very few, if not the only crimes where a prosecutor has the burden of actually proving what was in the mind of the person when they did it. And so not just the factual circumstances, but the motivation of the person when they were committing the act. So we do take that burden seriously and we do our best to investigate those, as I'm sure they're doing in Atlanta right now. But certainly a heinous crime. And, obviously my thoughts are with the folks in Atlanta and their families. And knock on wood, I can report to you that our experience here in Palo Alto has been that thankfully in my 15 years here, we have very, very few acts of violence that are hate crimes. Acts of property damage that are motivated by hate are certainly disturbing and certainly something to be taken seriously, which we do. But I will count our blessings that we have not been cursed with many acts of violence. I did want to provide some comparative stats from the FBI. So the FBI every year generates a report on hate crimes because agencies are required to submit certain data to the FBI on an annual basis about hate crimes. The FBI's reports for 2019, which is the most recent annual report that's available, 66% or roughly 2/3 of cases nationwide involved a threat or an assault versus only 1/3 involved a property crime like a vandalism. Palo Alto's experience in the last 10 or 15 years of statistics is actually quite the opposite. Roughly 2/3 of our offenses tend to be vandalism or theft versus fewer than 1/3 tend to be threats or actual acts of violence. The other thing to be noted is that when we do have our few acts of violence, those tend to be the cases that we have been able to solve. So we have a pretty high solvability rate on hate crimes that involve threats or actual acts of violence. Unfortunately, that cannot be said about vandalisms and thefts. And really it's dictated by the nature of the offense. Vandalisms are inherently very difficult to investigate because they tend to be completed in a fleeting way, usually overnight and usually without victims, usually without victims seeing it or witnesses seeing it. And so vandalisms that are hate-based are no different in that regard. Most commonly when we're contacted by a victim of a vandalism, they don't have any suspect identified or any leads or evidence to give us at that time. It doesn't mean we can't investigate it to look for that evidence or those leads, which we do, just like any other crime. But just to illustrate the point that unfortunately, those types of offenses inherently are just, they put us at a disadvantage from the start. For those wondering, the victims in our hate crimes over that 10 to 15 year period of stats I provided do not have an overwhelming commonality in terms of we don't see an overwhelming number of crimes aimed at any one particular ethnicity. We have a variety of folks who have been victims, some as a result of ethnicity or race, some as a result of gender, some as a result of their sexual orientation. One thing I also wanted to illustrate, and I know this is a fine point to make, and so I want to be very clear about why I bring it up. The police department, we consider ourselves, knock on wood, fortunate that in this community, we take 5,000 to 7,000 police reports on an annual basis, and only a small fraction of them are hate crimes. On the one hand, that should give some comfort that these crimes are relatively infrequent, at least as reported to us. And I leave room for the idea that certainly some go underreported, as is the case with a number of crimes that are sensitive in nature. But I want to be very clear when I say that while they are few as a percentage of our overall annual reports, I do recognize, and the police department recognizes, that it doesn't make any individual occurrence any less troubling for the victim or for us. So we take them seriously, whether there's one or whether there's 100. So some challenges, I just want to point out a couple I mentioned earlier are already. Just the fact that there are some that are underreported. We know that some of this stuff happens and people just shake their heads and move on, and they don't call us. And so we don't have the opportunity to investigate. Some people are embarrassed or for whatever reason, recognize perhaps that they have no idea who did it, and so they don't bother reporting it to us. The other thing that's a challenge in a way is that freedom of speech provides a very wide berth for verbal and written communications, even communications that are overtly bigoted or even hateful in nature. So we may find, you and I, something that somebody says or writes extremely offensive, extremely hateful, and readily recognize it as being motivated by bigotry or hate, but they may very well have a constitutional right to say or write whatever that was. And so oftentimes when we're contacted, that's a decision that we have to consider, or a thing we have to consider. So I think what I'll do is, since we've touched on Bay Area crimes, I think the chief did as well. I won't belabor that, but I will move on just to the training component before we move on to questions. I'm sure there's a few. So from a training perspective, every police officer in the state of California receives instruction on hate crimes investigation and recognition in 2 different blocks of instruction during the basic police academy, both during the cultural diversity section and during the principled policing section of the academy. Those sections cumulatively are over 20 hours in length and include training on hate crimes. Above and beyond that, every officer receives mandatory refresher training on the topic of hate crimes every 3 years. That's mandated by state law as of 2019. A law passed in 2019, but we were already complying with that on a regular basis. We actually just had a refresher hate crimes training in early January of this year, after having it the prior January in 2020. So I think what I'll do there is leave it for questions. I appreciate your invitation and your patience.
Wow, thank you so much. Let's do our first round robin with commissioners, and then I knew we were going to have public comment. I could guarantee that much. So, Commissioner Theriault, first round of questions for you, ma'am.
I'm regretting that my name starts with D and is first.
You want me to go first? I'll go first
Yes,
at the
please.
end. Okay, thank you. All right. Officer Reichschneider, I have a question around, there was a sign that was found on by Phil's Coffee, and it was also found on PAUSD property at 3 different locations, referring to, I'm not going to say what it said, but which inevitably leaves part of our community feeling like they are being marginalized, pushed aside. Does that fall into any category of hate incident or hate crime?
So the answer is I'm aware of the incidents you're referring to. They were referred to us. As I said, that was one of a group of third-hand things that are reported to us, not having had a chance to see them in person or come out and investigate them. I would say that falls into that very nebulous area that I would encourage, actually, and I don't mean to slough this off on DA Boyarsky or the DA's office, but that falls in that very nebulous freedom of speech area where the use of derogatory language in writing or in speech has a lot of wide berth. And unfortunately can be unsettling and disturbing and offensive to you and I, but may not represent a crime. The other thing too is that language that can be construed as neutral as opposed to language that is an overt slur is also problematic. So that particular case you point to is actually one of the more challenging puzzles of the incidents I'm aware of, because it did not involve an overt slur, but in context, certainly I could see why some people would find it offensive.
All right. The other question I have is, one of the frustrations, particularly in African American and AAPI and other communities, is that oftentimes when we have violence that are committed by white males, we often hear the default defense of it was mental illness, or it was some level of addiction to something. How does that impact hate crime charges? Because it is very frustrating to us when you start talking about things like the Mother Emanuel shooting, when we hear about the young gentleman having mental health issues, and when you hear in different cases the mental health angle and lone wolf, and this is not a hate crime, but it just keeps happening.
So that's a fantastic question. So bad behavior of all kinds, and certainly hate crimes, can oftentimes have either a mental health or a substance abuse component to it, but neither of those things excuses the criminal conduct. So the way that we treat it from the police department's perspective is there could very well be 2 parallel elements. So, and I'll actually use our most recent incident as a good illustration of that. For those that aren't familiar, we had an incident in early 2021 where a gentleman of Middle Eastern descent was in the California Avenue business district, and he was approached by a woman who was Caucasian, who asked him for money. When he declined to give her money, she actually started hitting him and battering him, all the while making statements that made it clear that she had some bias against his perceived ethnicity. And so in that case, in talking to her, and interacting with her, it was abundantly clear that she did in fact have some mental health challenges and mental health history, but nonetheless, her behavior that day was criminal. So she was arrested and charged, and I'll let DA Boyarsky, I think, touch on that, but she was arrested and charged, and I think actually with a hate crime charge. But in addition to that, she was referred for a mental health evaluation. So those two things do not have to be an either or proposition. They can operate in parallel. So where we're arresting for the criminal offense and pursuing appropriate criminal punishment, while at the same time recognizing that the person may be ill and can benefit from treatment.
Okay. I'm going to hold the rest of my questions. Vice Chair, do you have any questions?
Thank you, I do, and I really appreciate your giving us such a thorough and sensitive report. I wondered, at what point is the report filed? I mean, sometimes we hear about a sign being stolen or graffiti, and there's this, oh, it's just the high school kids. And then, no, it was really hate crime. I mean, is that like something that the individual officer has to struggle with and then decide, or does he or she file the report and then it's edited? And where is that decision made?
So ultimately, yes, officers in the field have to be empowered to make decisions about whether the elements of a crime have been met. That's why they're going out to investigate it. Obviously, with input from their supervisor on cases where there may be some complexities or if they're unclear. And in particular, in cases where they're investigating a crime that's not something they investigate on a daily basis, we would expect them to seek out supervisory input. In terms of if someone were to contact us about an incident that they believe to be motivated by hate, we will go out, investigate, determine if criminal elements exist. If criminal elements exist, then we would file the police report and identify it as a crime, investigate it, and obviously, if we identify a suspect, pursue criminal charges. On the other hand, if they call us out to investigate an incident and we find that the elements of a crime are not met by what we have, but nonetheless, it's a disturbing incident of the type we've talked about, we're still going to complete a police report about that for the very reason of documenting, because here's what might happen. God forbid, but what if the person commits an act that's offensive but not criminal on Monday, but then on Tuesday escalates their behavior to criminality? Well, if we didn't investigate and document on Monday, it puts us at a distinctive disadvantage on Tuesday. So that's why we want to track and document cases, even if the elements of a crime are not met.
Interesting. My other question, I guess, is on copycat crimes. Do we see that in any of the incidents that you've described, or?
So I can't say that I've seen in Palo Alto's trends copycat crimes. I would say certainly this fall we did see a trend, as you are all aware, of tampering, theft, and some vandalisms involving signage. I don't know to what extent that was the work of, I suspect not the work of one individual, but rather the work of numerous individuals. I don't know that it'd be fair to characterize any of them as copying the other.
Okay, great. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Savage.
Yeah, thank you, Captain, for a really thorough presentation. And I'm really glad you made the distinction between a hate crime or hate incident versus offensive acts or offensive language or bad behavior that doesn't necessarily constitute a crime. I think that's important for everyone to understand. But other than that, no, I just want to thank you for your time. Very informative.
Commissioner Regehr.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. I just had a couple of questions, and it's more of a philosophical question, which is harder to address. But being that we had a talk where we were listening to people talking about African Americans and Latinx talking about how they've been feeling about the police. And I'm wondering, how do we expect as a community to have people trust the police when they feel that they themselves have been affected by the police in a negative way. And that's more of a philosophical question, but I think that's more of what's going on in our community. I mean, I am concerned about, but we have people of color that are feeling nervous, you know, and I know, and we have the incident of what happened in Mountain View with the dogs. You know, it was an Asian man. We have, you know, we've had lawsuits and we've had to pay millions of dollars. And I guess that's my question of how are you bringing about trust to people, to everyone, it's a different twist to this question, to the hate crime, but.
I'll do my very best, Commissioner. So you've managed to ask the $1 million question that law enforcement has been asking itself for certainly the last year, but for many years prior to that. Our goal is really to have a community that does trust us, and that's valuable for a variety of reasons. And I'll tell you what I tell every new officer that I train when they come in, and that is that the reason it's important to treat everyone with respect, regardless of the circumstance under which you encounter them, is twofold. One, because, well, it's the right thing to do, right? It's the human right thing to do, to treat other human beings with respect. But as a practical matter, the reason it's important is you never know when next you are going to interact with the same person. And so what I mean by that is, even if I'm interacting, whether I'm interacting with a victim, whether I'm interacting with a witness, whether I'm interacting with a suspect, we live in a small world. And it is very likely that I will interact with that person again, maybe in the same conditions, maybe in a different condition. And if I treat them disrespectfully on one day, it's very reasonable for them to expect me to treat them disrespectfully the next time and for them to treat me in kind. So all I can say as a supervisor and now as a manager is that I expect my officers to be respectful with everyone. But that only addresses the individual officer issue, right? From a more systemic approach, I would say that a crucial element to at least what's perceived as best practices in policing is to try to diversify your recruiting. Because in a perfect world, at least the common wisdom seems to be that a community responds best to a police department that looks like the community it serves, so that you don't have a situation where the police department is viewed as some sort of invading force, right? You want the police department to be viewed as part of the neighborhood, part of the community. And so having spent the last 3 years of my career before I came to my present assignment in our training and our hiring bureau, we basically turned our recruiting on its head and started recruiting at places we'd never recruited before, going farther away to recruit, going to non-conventional places to recruit, just in an effort to try to attract as many applicants and as diverse a pool of applicants as we can. And I can say anecdotally, our hires during that period were substantially more diverse in nature than they had been in prior periods. So we're doing our very best, both on an individual basis as well as kind of a department-wide systemic approach to increase trust.
Where's Mika with my time?
You still have time because I wasn't counting the response.
That's good. But I don't know how to phrase it. I think that was a good answer, but I don't know if it's an effective answer in regards to what happens in our community.
Good point.
And I don't know how to get. I mean, I was surprised that that you guys had never been to an LGBTQ training until the lawsuit. I mean, I'm just surprised. I mean, and our dogs, you know, I mean, what happened? I guess we all, have you learned, I mean, what have you learned from these incidences that have happened? I guess what my point is.
So I'm
And
afraid I'm not prepared to comment probably intelligently or publicly about the specifics of any of those instances, since it wasn't something on tonight's agenda formally. So I apologize for that. What I can tell you, only because I am very familiar with it. So we had, in fact, had training involving LGBTQ issues prior to the training you're referring to. And it was already a part of post-academy training as well. And actually, as it relates to that specific training that you're referring to, that training was actually scheduled prior to the resolution of that lawsuit. So it dovetailed nicely with the settlement of the suit, but it was not actually as a result of the suit. In fact, we had sent multiple of our officers to train the trainer for that training prior to that resolution.
Okay, and then I have one more question, and it's regarding the hate, because I think I still have a little bit more time. It was about the towing, and I know it, but it is related to hate crime, because I think people felt that they were being targeted, and they were in some ways, because I know that you guys got a lot of complaints about cleaning, but I think, and was buzzing for a long time, but I think there was the week before, it was all cleaned up. It was all cleaned. And then the towing, and then, the notices. And I'm concerned that just as protection for our community, because I know the police chief said, he's here to protect us all, but that means all. And these people were terrorized. And I know that, there's a 72-hour, then you do it to everybody else. But these people, this is their homes. And it was cleaned. It was before. And the hatred that I was reading on Nextdoor about people that living in the vehicles. And I guess it's not that's a targeted group of people too. And I'm wondering if you could address that a little bit.
I'll try my best, or if the chief would like to, I'll obviously defer.
Yeah, I will take that one, since it was not on the agenda, at least for your responsibility. And just maybe to alleviate a little the fear, the RV issue has definitely been a big issue for this community. We are, and I will say it, in a very difficult position. We are the enforcement arm of this city, and we do as we're told and asked to do. The issues with RVs are complex. We prepared a blog on that was released a few weeks ago, the complexity of that enforcement. We're just trying to do everything we can to find balance. And the warning tow notices are just part of that balance. And I would wish that all the people that have not been part of that enforcement effort take time to really learn about what we're doing and how we're doing it. Because each and every time they go out there, they're actually doing it to offer help, to instill a little hope, and they're actually being very compassionate about the way they do it. Yes, we have to put the warning notices on all the vehicles because it's part of the protocol, but we're also taking a tremendous amount of time in working with the RV people that are living in these RVs to accommodate them, to help them along, get them resources that they need. And to answer one of the questions that came up or the comments made, we're not using our officers on a daily basis. We're actually using our community service officers who are non-sworn, non-armed personnel. They're the ones going out there and offering this help, this assistance. And yes, for the ones that are not inhabited, they have to leave notices because we have no way of contacting the owners in that vehicle. We have only towed 2 RVs out of 450 notices. Both of those RVs were uninhabited and appeared that nobody was living them in. We have to tow them to get them off the streets. Again, we don't go out there wanting to tow vehicles. We do it as a last resort. And by no means are we putting these notices on vehicles to terrorize anyone. That is not our objective. And if we didn't have to be in this business, trust me, we would be more than happy to get out of it. So as Rachel mentioned earlier, is that we follow the guidelines that are directed to us by the policymakers. If the policymakers of the city want to change the ordinance and not have us enforce 72-hour, we will follow that rule. So I think we are taking a tremendous amount of heat. The men and women of this organization do their very best to provide the service they can in a fair and compassionate way. And again, I wish sometimes community members would take a little time to learn more about us before they start commenting against us. And that is a part of this organization that I truly miss, is our community advisory committee meetings and our academies, because then community members can engage with us. We did throughout the summer with Reverend Smith, and many of you engage extensively on a lot of issues, and a lot of positive outcomes came out of that engagement. So we're always open and welcome to be part of those conversations.
So I have one more question then.
Thank you. Wait.
Who directed you to do it then? You said you didn't, what person?
A lot of people, we get those complaints. We
You
have
got
a
complaints
policy.
about cleaning, but did anybody go and realize
No.
that it was
Commissioner, with all due
before?
respect, we receive over 1,000 complaints a year regarding RVs and 72-hour parking violations. Our policy for this department, if somebody calls to complain, we send a unit out. Again, if this city does not want us to follow up on complaints that are made by the community, we won't do it. But again, that's an issue that the community has to decide what they want us to do and how they want us to do it. We are just the enforcement arm. We do not want to have to be the messengers, especially during this economic troubling time. Trust me, there's nobody in this department that enjoys having to do anything that causes somebody stress and suffering. It's just following direction, doing what we're asked to do, and enforcing the rules of the road.
Thank you so much, both Commissioner and Chief. Commissioner Terria.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Captain, for explaining and emphasizing the importance of distinguishing between hate crimes and hate incidents, but also making the point that it's really important that we report them all, because they're usually a precursor to potential escalation, and we want to track that. I think it's really helpful for folks to realize the importance of reporting all of these incidents precisely for that reason. I wonder, and this is a little bit related to what Commissioner Regier was saying, I wonder whether there's a need for some kind of a unit that is non-police related, where folks who may not feel so safe, people of color, different marginalized communities who may not feel so friendly or safe when they think of police presence, might be able to report different kinds of hate crimes in a way that felt more comfortable for them. So I throw that out there. It's something that our HRC had talked about in the past. Is there a need, or would that be helpful for us to sort of flag at least hate incidents that seem to be more prevalent? Like you mentioned, many of the ones that in our letter never got reported, right? But they were, they were second or third hand, but you can't do anything with that. That's just not how it works. So I put that out there as a question, as one of the ways that we could detect these early increases in the incidents. And then I guess this is an actual question around, what you were saying about disrespectful behavior and the importance of realizing that anyone you're dealing with today, you may be dealing with tomorrow in a different way, and treating them as human beings. And I guess my question would be around, how do you, I listen to you and I hear you and I commend that. And I think it is a beautiful sentiment and a very human movement to want to deal with people this way. I guess I wonder, is there a culture amongst the folks who work at the PAPD where officers would feel comfortable to report if any fellow officer had some disrespectful behavior or made some kind of a slur? Like, I know that it's important that there be collaboration and teamwork, and how do you create a culture, or how do you deal with if someone comes forth and says, hey, I was really uncomfortable? Is there a way to do that anonymously? I was uncomfortable with something that happened on a scene. And how do you create that kind of a culture so that folks can, without consequence or without putting their own having their back cared for by their fellow officer, but then reporting maybe something that was not up to the standards that you're describing to us around treating people with respect?
So there's a number of mechanisms by which that might happen. I will tell you that one of the perhaps advantages of working in law enforcement is that you do have a lot of type A personalities who don't shy away with sharing their opinions with others, including their criticisms, or I'll call it constructive criticism of their colleagues. So there is a culture of direct confrontation over some of those things, but you make a fair point that sometimes people just don't feel comfortable doing it that way, and there needs to be a mechanism for them to do that. So our policy allows, and we educate on this policy, our policy allows for a couple of different avenues. One would be you're free to skip any line in the chain of command if you feel uncomfortable. So in other words, I'm a bad example because I work for the assistant chief, so I really could just go to the chief, I guess. But if hypothetical Officer Jones has a concern, then he doesn't necessarily have to go to his sergeant or even his lieutenant. He could go straight to the captain or straight to the chief, or frankly, straight to the city HR department, or straight to anyone else in the city organization to report those concerns. Because we do recognize that certain types of things, and I would liken it in a way to the way we train on sexual harassment or any other kind of racial-based harassment in the workplace, where we want people to report behavior that's not acceptable, whether it's aimed at a colleague or whether it's aimed at a member of the public. And we want to give them several ways to do that. The other thing I did want to touch on was your suggestion, which is I think a good one, about trying to increase the avenues by which the public can report things if they don't feel comfortable picking up the phone and calling us. I know that the district attorney's office does get calls directly to report crimes, and if appropriate, they reach out to us and sort of grease the skids, so to speak, to get us going on something. Or on the other hand, they may retain it in-house because they have investigators for those circumstances, but they're a valuable resource. Frankly, I'll say that the members of this commission and other elected and appointed officials can be a valuable resource too, because you have access to actual names and faces and emails. And my hope is that I don't have an unrealistic view that after a few minutes with me tonight, that you will make a permanent decision on my character and trustworthiness. But I would hope that at least having met me and heard me and can associate a name with a face, that if something were to come to your attention tomorrow or next week, that you would at least think to call me or email me directly about it.
So just a tiny follow-up, Minka, if I still have some time.
No, you go. You're good.
Okay. I guess, so when you were saying that you can skip anybody, you can go to the direct top, I forget the words you used, but is this in an anonymous way so that somebody can not have consequences? And even if it is anonymous, I wonder how realistic that is in terms of like potential consequences for junior officers. And I guess it seems to me that, and I don't know the answer to this, and I guess I'm really asking to sort of dig a little more into the sort of the sentiment that you expressed around the importance of treating people with respect. If there are folks who are more senior and there's junior officers there, it's a really challenging thing, and there could be consequences, or to sort of think that something that someone to your senior is doing is not appropriate. So I guess it's a challenging question, and I guess I would like to know if there's ways to do that in a way that is anonymous, and is it actually realistic that there wouldn't be sort of fallout from that for folks who might want to call out. And I say this because it seems like there are a lot of cases where there is this hierarchy and this pecking order, and juniors don't interfere when someone is there with 20 years of experience doing something completely inappropriate, like George Floyd last year. There were a lot of officers standing around, and that's a really challenging thing. What do you do? How can you intervene? And no one did. So that's really a very sensitive example, I suppose. But That's just to illustrate the issue that I'm trying to point to, that it's a challenging, complex one.
So the answer is a very unsatisfying one, which is it depends. So yes, if the behavior that's being reported is something that would be maybe the subject of training or correction in that way, I think it's pretty easy to handle that one in an anonymous way. So for example, if a sergeant that worked for me or a lieutenant that worked for me came to me and said, hey, I saw somebody and they were rude the other day, and or I felt like they could have maybe gone at this situation a little bit differently and it wasn't the most professional, but it doesn't rise to the level where discipline would be appropriate, but rather an intervention, counseling, training, etc. That's something that I would happily treat in an anonymous way and address. However, if the allegation being leveled against the employee is something that is going to or potentially result in discipline, then our options for accepting a truly anonymous report are pretty limited, only because we then have to provide due process to the employee related to the discipline. So if we, do people report things to the police, criminal or internal, anonymously? Yes. We have avenues where the public can report things to us through an anonymous app that we have that does not allow us any way to contact them other than through this anonymized third-party service. So we do get tips from the public that way. I suppose that someone internally could use that forum where they're certainly aware it exists, although I'm not familiar with an instance it's been used that way.
All right. We're going to go into public comment. Then I'll do one last. And I just want to say thank you to the DA for being with us for this long. I just want to do public comment, 2 minutes each. We'll do one last group of comments before we get to the DA.
Chair, this is Mary. I'm having problems. I'm going to try using my clock. If not, I'll have to do it manually because I was having some computer problems. But sorry to interrupt.
So it looks like we'll just do it manually. So we ask that the two speakers, I will go off screen. So when you see me back on screen, you will know that you're, looks, she did it. Yeah.
Here we go. Thank you. Thank you, Mary.
Okay, so our first speaker is Rebecca Eisenberg, to be followed by Aaron James. So Rebecca, go ahead, please. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak right now. So many things to respond to. First of all, I found Officer Johnson's report to be extremely problematic. Specifically, there are a lot of misstatements about what constitutes a hate crime. I speak with knowledge and authority. I actually was one of the people who helped draft and get passed the Violence Against Women Act, which of course is a law that prohibits hate crimes, those against women. As you know, the state of California calls a hate crime any crime that is due in part, or in whole, to bias, whether that bias is conscious or unconscious, against a protected class, and race, sex, gender, sexual orientation, etc., disability. It's troubling to hear that there is an active motive or intent requirement when unconscious bias is actually the basis of the vast amount of hate crimes in our country and world. I'd be happy to discuss this with you all at greater length. Again, I'm an attorney who helped draft and pass the Violence Against Women Act. Also briefly, it is troubling also to hear him say that he had no choice but to ticket the RVs. Every other city has actually, its police department has waived any enforcement regarding vehicle dwellers whatsoever. And Palo Alto needs to do that as well. It is what every other city is doing, and we should not be enforcing those laws. It's particularly upsetting that the police department worked so hard to gain an, in my opinion, unjustified amount of independence, yet still blames city council and the city for its
Thank you,
wrongdoing.
Ms. Eisenberg. Thank you so much for, thank you.
Oh, fuck you so much.
The next speaker is Aram James. Aram, you have 2 minutes. Go ahead, please.
So first of all, it came to my attention today that we have 2 Black police officers, none in management, both more than 30 years. So recruiting is really something you need to ask about. 2, they couldn't have gotten to historically Black colleges. There's lots of places. So that's a really problematic answer. Secondly, I do want to say that my free speech rights have been respected. In my neighborhood, I have 2 signs that read, "This is a Black Lives Matter zone," with little Palestinian flags on them. In addition, one of my signs reads, "Fire racist police officer Zach Perone." Did you hear that, Chair? That's one of my other signs. In any event, I know when we get to Jay, because he's a former member of the Anti-Defamation League and a good friend of mine. We never agree on policy, but he remembers me in the PD's office. That even in Europe, you can't make claims that the Holocaust didn't occur. I can make that statement right tonight as a Jew, and it's free speech. So that's an interesting issue. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Zach Perone, hate crime that your department's not working with. Gustavo Alvarez, the Buena Vista mobile home cover-up, a hate crime you're not dealing with. Julio Arevalo, the Happy Donuts one that Officer Sergeant Captain Reichschneider, actually the filming of the video when it was finally released, he actually narrated it as a chilling narration, if I can still find it online. And of course, the vile, vile dog attack hate crime that was released to us. And then of course, the Albert Hopkins case where there was a $250,000 settlement when still on the force, Officer Lee, along with then his partner Khan, brutally beat an African-American, Albert Hopkins. And it goes on and on and on. This is a department with a long history of the discriminatory police enforcement. Don't buy this propaganda campaign by these officers.
Thank you, Aram.
Thank you, Mr. James.
That was our last speaker, Mary.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other commissioners with any other statements for PD before we move to DA? All right, I'll say something and then we can move to the DA. Officer Reichschneider, thank you so much for coming tonight. As I sat and listened to the report tonight, I will tell you, as a pastor of a minority congregation, I feel less settled than I did before. And I've shared this with the chief before, and I've shared this with the assistant chief. Great policy does not make great comfort in community. And the reality, if I was an Asian American or a Black American, and I am significantly worried about hate crimes right now, I feel like we have a lot of rules that will let people say anything to us and be how they want to be. And then they could say, you know what, I didn't mean it, and walk away. So this moment is forcing me to really dig deeper in the law and reach out to those that legislate, reach out to the NAACP, reach out to some of the other bodies, because if we live in a country that we start on a slippery slope with things like the Wuhan flu, then we have with signs in communities like the Wuhan flu, then you have seniors that are of Asian descent get attacked, and council members in the city get verbally abused. And then we see people in other communities get attacked, and we see people get shot. It sounds like the only recourse we have is when it becomes a crime and it's too late. And I feel, and it's not your fault, you just reported the facts as you know them, but I'm just going to tell you from my perspective and my community's perspective, it's not very reassuring. I was hoping to be reassured tonight. I really was, and it was not. So, commissioners, do we have any other questions? Thank you so much, Chief Johnson. Thank you so much, Captain Reich-Schneider, for your time. And hopefully we can keep the dialogue going, and we will continue to work as this as a community. Chief District Attorney Jay Boyski and Deputy District Attorney Aaron West, the time is yours.
Thank you, Reverend. Just want to say thank you to all of the commissioners as well as members of the public, and Chief Johnson and Captain Reich-Schneider. Thank you for your service on the HRC. I've been a fan and monitoring the HRC for all the time I've been living in Palo Alto since 1998. And you're doing righteous work, and we're coming together tonight in really fellowship with open hearts to do important work. And just want to thank you for everything that you do by serving in this way. If I sound a little weary, it's really not because of the late hour or the long meeting. It's because of what's been happening in our world, from the insurrection, January 6th, to the fact that every single one of my Asian friends is telling me they're afraid. They're telling their parents not to go outside. It's absolutely demoralizing. And then to see what happened in Atlanta, it's just terrible. It's horrific. And so, Reverend, I'm sorry that you haven't heard anything to give you solace. I would just say that you're not alone, and you have many allies, all of us working together trying to heal the world. And I think that's the work that we're doing, to do our best to make the world a more just place. So I had a PowerPoint presentation that I will show, but frankly, Captain Reich-Schneider, who is a more recent law school graduate than I am, gave one of the best legal presentations on hate crimes that Aaron and I have ever seen done. I thought, wow, this guy's just doing my presentation, and then he went on to do it even better than me. So, I mean, I'll go through it a little quickly because sometimes repetition is a good way to learn, but I'm going to do that in a moment when I share my screen. And then I want to share a 1-minute public service announcement that District Attorney Jeff Rosen produced back in April that if you all haven't seen it yet, I'm very pleased to share it with you tonight, and hopefully you can share it with others. So I'd like to screen that for you. And then something that I'm sure you'll find more interesting is Aaron West is going to spend a few minutes talking about the 11 or 12 most recent hate crimes that we have charged in Santa Clara County going back through 2020. And we'll show some stats. Does that
Will you be
sound
able to touch base on the hate crime unit that the county is also doing?
I can just tell you that I'm proud to be one of the voting members of the Santa Clara County Hate Crime Task Force that's chaired by Supervisor Cindy Chavez and Councilmember Maya Esparza. We just had our first meeting a few weeks ago where I presented this PowerPoint presentation that you're going to see, and I showed this public service announcement. So it's just starting, but I'm really happy that our county is paying so much attention, and they started getting that task force together a few months ago. So that's all I have to report about the county task force. But I would encourage all of you to attend any of the meetings. I think the next one is March 26th, but that would be available on the county website. Erin being so good, I bet she's checking that date right now. So that's how I'd like to spend the next 15 or 20 minutes. I'll spend 5 to 10 minutes, and then EA Erin West will talk about some specific cases. And then I'm happy to answer any and all questions that anyone has. Does that sound all right?
That works.
All right. I see people nodding. So I'm going to share my screen, share it with sound.
This is not a Chinese virus.
This is not an Italian virus.
Viruses do not have ethnicities, religion, sexuality, or gender.
But our community does.
And if you hurt or threaten someone because of those things, you'll have a lot more to worry about than COVID-19. When you attack a member of our community because of their ethnicity, the color of their skin, or where you think someone is from,
then you have attacked us all.
So that's an example of the community outreach that we do in the district attorney's office. And we were the first organization that I'm aware of, certainly the first DA's office in the United States that did something like that. And we did that back in April. And now there are so many more attacks on Asian Americans than back then. But those of us who do this for a living, we were worried, and we could see it coming. Why it's happening so much now in the last month or two, I don't know. But when you have a president who refers to a virus as the Kung flu or the China virus or the Wuhan virus, it's incitement, in my opinion, and it's inappropriate. And so we really, inspired by that, came together and produced that public service announcement. So that went viral, and that's out there now. So please share that with people if you think they would find it useful. Can you all see this PowerPoint presentation? Thank you, Minka. So I'm Jay Boyarsky. I'm the Chief Assistant DA for Santa Clara County. We have 630 employees in the DA's office. We're the largest prosecutor's office north of Los Angeles. We're probably the 10th or 11th largest DA's office in the United States. We have 180 lawyers, 180 prosecutors. And I've been a prosecutor for 26.5 years. Deputy DA Erin West has been a prosecutor for almost that long. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I went to college at UC Santa Cruz, and I was able to go to law school at Berkeley. And I'm the first person to go to college in my family, and didn't know any lawyers in my family. But when I thought about becoming a lawyer, it was because I wanted to prosecute hate crimes and experiences that I had myself growing up, being bullied and seeing bad things. And I thought that that would be meaningful work. And it's been a professional interest of mine for a long time. So Reverend, when you said a lifelong advocate against hate crimes, that really meant a lot to me to hear you say that. So thank you very much. So again, Captain Reifschneider went over this, so I'll go through this fairly quickly. And I can't see any of your faces now, so give a shout out or something if you have a question or something's not working. A hate crime is an unlawful action against the person or property of another that is committed substantially because of the victim's actual or perceived race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, disability, gender, or sexual orientation. That's the definition of a hate crime. How is it different than a hate incident? As you've heard, a hate incident does not necessarily involve a crime. Racial epithets, for example, given the First Amendment, do not constitute a crime unless it's accompanied with a very specific threat to cause someone bodily harm or injury. But if you commit a crime, such as a battery or vandalism, and there's evidence that shows it was done substantially because of the victim's actual perceived race, color, religion, etc., that's a hate crime. It's the only crime, as Captain Reifschneider said, where the people need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt motive. On television, you hear on those police shows, well, what was the motive behind the murder? Motive is not an element in a crime. People want to know, the jury wants to know, why was this crime committed? But you don't need to prove why, as long as you can prove that a crime was committed. But that's not the case in prosecuting hate crimes. We need to show what was in the person's mind. And that can be difficult or problematic. And Reverend Smith, you talked about intoxication, drug use, mental illness. I can follow up on that later on, because that can bear upon this element of motive. The bias must be a cause of the offense. So even if there's other causes that exist for the crime, this bias must be a substantial reason for the crime. So for example, where Captain Reifschneider described the hate crime in Palo Alto earlier, where a woman attacked a man who appeared to be Middle Eastern, one could argue she attacked him because he didn't give her money when she was asking for money. But there was another cause in the crime she committed. We know it was a bias crime because she then started calling him a terrorist and go back to where you came from and things of that nature that indicated that it was a hate crime. So there were multiple causes. Where there are multiple motives, the bias must be a substantial factor in the crime. It doesn't need to be the main factor. You don't need to show that in the absence of the bias, a crime wouldn't have occurred, but it can't be merely incidental. Here are lots of the different types of entities that can be victims. And if anybody ever asks you or you ever hear who can be the victim of a hate crime, all of us and any of us. This is not about the thought police. This is not about the First Amendment. This is not about a law that only protects minorities or only protects gay people. These are laws that protect all of us, no matter what our race, ethnicity, or status is. We are all protected and we are all potential victims. And in fact, if we are perceived to fall into one of those categories. For example, there are times when members of our Sikh community are attacked because they are perceived to be Muslim. So even though they are not Muslim and the crime was an Islamophobic hate crime, they were perceived to be Muslim, but that is still a hate crime. Here's some statistics. Last year, we had 17 cases in the county brought to us, and we had sufficient evidence to file 14 of them. And Aaron West is going to tell you more about some of the the facts. Remember, statistics can be misleading, they can be confusing. The statistics that Captain Reifschneider told you about, I think, for example, he said there were 6 crime reports of hate crimes in 2020, if I'm recalling. We only get a case, no matter what kind of case it is, hate crime or not a hate crime, if the case has been solved. Because police don't bring us cases if they don't have an identified suspect that they think committed the crime. So but the police can certainly have crimes and they can know it's a hate crime, but if they don't have an identified suspect, it's not going to be brought to the district attorney's office. So there are hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of what I would call hate incidents in Santa Clara County, a county of 2 million. And Captain Reifschneider gave you that good definition of what a hate incident is. There are fewer hate crimes than hate incidents. And then within the hate crime category, how many of them are solved? That's an even smaller number. And then, of course, we've talked about crimes and incidents that never get reported, which is a huge issue. And that's partly one of the things that I'm sure the County Hate Crime Task Force will address. I'm just not even going to talk about these specific statutes because Captain Reifschneider already did. He did a great job talking about it. Here's 2 interesting hate crimes. It's a law to display a noose. If you meet these elements, it's a law to put a swastika up. You know, these are laws, so there's all sorts of exceptions, but these are laws that are on the books that we will prosecute. So that is my PowerPoint presentation. That's a very quick summary of what a hate crime is and how it's different than a hate incident and what we need to prove. So let me turn it over now to Deputy District Attorney Erin West, and she can describe the last 10 or 11 hate crimes that we've prosecuted in Santa Clara County. I wouldn't say so now you understand what the trends are because we're talking about so few cases. I wouldn't say that 12 hate crimes are representative of the trend of hate incidents, if that makes sense, because there are many more hate incidents than there are hate crimes. But this will, I think, be useful to give you a sense of typical hate crimes that we see in Santa Clara County. And then, of course, when Erin is finished, we look forward to answering questions. Erin?
Thank you, Jay. My role at the District Attorney's Office, I've been a prosecutor for 23 years, and my role is to review the incoming hate crime cases, make recommendations and discuss them with Jay and other interested parties in the District Attorney's Office, and then keep statistics and logs so we know what's happening in our county. But like Jay explained to you, we know a small piece of what's happening in our county. We know the cases that are solved, victims identified, suspects identified, victims wanting prosecution and ready to be prosecuted. We don't get to see the incidents, and we certainly don't know the people who, for whatever reason, are not reporting these crimes. So in 2020, we filed 14 hate crimes in Santa Clara County. And I want you to know that they come from all over the county. There were 7 that originated from San Jose PD, 5 from the Sheriff's Office. There was 1 from Palo Alto, 1 from Santa Clara, 1 from Gilroy, and 1 from Morgan Hill. There were 5 where the victims were African American, 4 Latino victims, 2 Asian victims, 1 from the LGBTQ community, 1 was a hate crime against a Jewish person, and 1 was against someone from the Middle East. So I thought it might be helpful to you to understand what some of these crimes are that we face. And in 2020, as I said, there were 14 of them. And I'm also going to talk to you about the crimes that we filed in 2021. In 2021, we have already filed 6 cases to date. And again, from all over the community, 2 from San Jose, 1 from Morgan Hill, 1 from Palo Alto, 1 from Sunnyvale, and 1 from Mountain View.
DA West?
Yes.
Is that an escalation of, that sounds like within the first quarter, if you continue that pace, you'll be at 24 cases filed for the year.
That's exactly right.
Wow.
So
there is an escalation.
We are seeing an escalation, yes.
And if I remember correctly from the stats earlier, you had 14 last year?
Correct. And
the
we're
year
already
before it was 2.
correct.
Okay.
And in 2021, just to update you on the types of crimes, there were 2 against African Americans, 2 against Asians, 1 against the LGBTQ community, and 1 against the Middle East. Well, not the Middle East, but an unspecified Middle Eastern comment. So to take you through some of the fact scenarios that we see, they run the gamut. And you heard the captain talking to you about the various things we see, such as hate associated with graffiti, hate associated with assault, hate associated with threats of assault. So, for example, in 2020, of the 5 against the African American community, 1 was a couple sitting in their car eating food that they'd purchased from Burger King. Defendant walked up to their car, threatened them, used a slur, and threw a beer can at their car. So in that case, we charged a misdemeanor, 422.6. That's our misdemeanor. That's our standard misdemeanor charge. Another situation involved the defendant living in a mental health group home. He gets agitated with a person who tries to calm him down, strangles him, and says it was because he was Black. In another case, the defendant was an upstairs neighbor of the victim, told the victim, "You and your fat bitch girlfriend can go back to Africa. You should go back to being slaves and picking cotton. We're going to get someone to F you up with guns. I'm going to smash your car windows." Then made a hand gesture simulating a noose around her neck. Another case involved a man in a wheelchair downtown when a defendant pulled a knife and said the N-word, "You monkey." The Latino community is experiencing similar situations. Defendant boards the VTA, calls the operator a wet back, and spits on him. In another situation, a victim boarded a bus and the defendant called him illegal and dirty, says that Mexicans are dirtier than him, hits him with a closed fist on victim's chin. A defendant was in downtown Gilroy, got into an argument with a Latina woman, tells her that she should go back to her country, and spits on her. So some really horrible behavior and offensive and violent, and just the act of spitting is something that is so degrading. As for Asians in 2020, there was a case that you may have heard about. There was an Asian couple in a grocery store. This was shortly after COVID began. They were approached by a defendant who said, "If I had an AK-47, I would kill you Chinese MFers right now," and made a gun gesture with his fingers. He later was resistant to attempts by the police to arrest him. As to the LGBTQ community, defendant instigates a bar fight and then calls the victim "you effing faggot." Targeting the Jewish community, the victim and defendant are neighbors. Victim was in his backyard speaking to his sons in Hebrew when defendant yelled at him and his sons through the fence, "You effing Jewish, what language do you speak? I'm going to show you," and then sprayed them with a hose. There was an incident involving a Middle Eastern man who was at a bus stop. Defendant pushed him and made a slur about Middle Easterners. So those are our 2020 cases. So turning our attention to what happened in 2021, against our African-American community, there was an argument, a victim and defendant got into an argument about smoking marijuana. Defendant escalated it and threatened the victim with a cane, using slurs and telling the victim to go back to Africa. Another distressing case, a young Hispanic Latino gang member told an older Black woman sitting on a park bench to get her Black ass up or he'll kick her in the effing face, called her the N-word several times. As to, we've heard in the news a little bit about these two attacks against Asians in our community. One was in Mountain View, where a woman approached an Asian couple having lunch, spit on them and told them to go back to their own country. And I think the most distressing case that we've heard about in recent memory is a young woman leaving Diridon train station in San Jose, going to work as a nurse when she is attacked from behind by a man who pulls her down. She narrowly escapes hitting her head because her backpack braces her, and he then uses a racial slur about her and tells witnesses that he was horny and sex deprived. So he's our most serious case at the moment. He's charged with sex crimes as well as hate crimes, an attempt to commit rape. An LGBTQ couple was at their mom's house when the defendant yelled, slurred at them, and made threats that he was going to kick their asses and have them taken out. And then I believe we've talked earlier about the Palo Alto case where the woman told the victim to get out of their country, our country, this country, demands his identification and threatens and hits him with a laptop. So I think what we're seeing here, as you rightly pointed out, Reverend, is a dramatic increase as so far in 2021 and certainly in 2020. And, you know, we don't, thankfully, we're in a position where we don't issue that many hate crimes, but it's not because these crimes aren't going on in our community. So the chief assistant and I always like opportunities to get to know people in our community better, because every time we can put faces to names, it gives us another opportunity to perhaps hear about what's really going on in the community and explore ways to get victims to come forward. And we want to reassure them that we take their claims very seriously, that we have a team of people who are dramatically, that it's of dramatic importance to us to prosecute these cases. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you. I will start. Commissioner Tiriel, do you want to start or should I start? Okay, it's my turn. Thank you. Well, first of all, so there's a few things that tonight has clearly revealed to me. You are at the end of the process, so you are getting the prosecutable stuff. So the incidences which weren't even really tracked before by most departments in the reporting are significant issues in communities, or are starting to be more significant. You're nodding your head, Jay. Is that a good extrapolation, or is that an overstatement of the case?
No, you're exactly right, Reverend. I mean, believe it or not, there's still 3 states in the United States. I don't know which the 3 are. I know one was Utah, but they passed a hate crime law recently. There's 3 states that don't even have a law against hate crimes. that the law passed in 1990 to requires law enforcement agencies to send their data to the FBI about hate crimes. It's antiquated, to say the least. So your extrapolation is completely correct.
Question for you, and I should have asked this. Is there any data currently that there could be a bias of just reporting crimes as the underlying crime without hate, depending on the officer taking the report?
I want to make sure I understand the question.
So there's an assault. There might be some language, and the officer says, you know what, it's an assault. It's not a hate crime. It's just an assault. Is there any data around that, any studying, any looking at biases? Because I know even Jennifer Eberhardt has had some really strong work around that and biasing and policing. And I want to know if anybody's looked at that as far as bias attacks and reporting.
We know that many crimes are underreported. Mm-hmm. And for example, sexual assault crimes, mm-hmm. certainly. Domestic violence, mm-hmm. certainly. We put out a race and prosecution study every year that's available on our website that talks about the disproportionality in the criminal justice system, as well as the disproportionality among different ethnic groups in terms of reporting crimes. Mm-hmm. We have long seen what we believe to be an underreporting of crime across the board by the Asian American community in Santa Clara County.
Does that also, how does that hold up against the African American and Black community? Do they also underreport in Latino community?
No. In terms of the percentages of Asians in Santa Clara County versus the amount of crime involving Asian victims or Asian defendants, mm-hmm. is completely disproportionate in an underreporting way, okay, as it relates to Asian Americans, mm-hmm. quite differently than as it relates to Caucasians, Latinos, and African Americans. And the reason I bring that up is now we're seeing this very troubling trend of hate incidents against Asian Americans. And we just know what we're hearing about is truly the tip of the iceberg, even more, in my opinion, because they involve Asian Americans who seem more reluctant to report crimes than do whites, Latinos, or African Americans. I'm referring to data that we have that applies to crime generally. And so if any of you are interested in seeing that information, it's every year we put out a study on race and prosecutions. I mean, it's nowhere near as thorough and complete as it should be. I feel like we are in the dark ages when it comes to our use of data. But again, I can tell you that I think we are the first district attorney's office in the United States to even put out such a report. Many, in my opinion, probably a lot of DA's offices don't like the data. They don't like what it might reveal or show, so they don't want to look at it. We want to look at it, so even if it makes us uncomfortable or we see things that we are rightfully concerned about, we can get to the bottom of it. So that's a race and prosecutions study.
Let me defer to my other commissioners. I think you gave me just some great stuff to think about. Thank you, Jay. Vice Chair.
Thank you. I'm deeply troubled by the distance between the data we saw in Palo Alto, the numbers, the statistics, and the difference between that and your experience in the community and my hope for this community. I think the letter to the council is a good announcement of the trajectory that this commission wants to pursue in its work. And I guess I'd ask our guests if they think that there's some utility in going to the county.
I think we can send a letter with modifications to the hate crime commission for the county. I'm pretty sure Jay will let it get air there. Have you seen the letter yet or no?
I have, and I've seen it, and I think it's excellent, and I think it should be submitted to the county task force without a doubt.
Thank you.
And then I think we need to continue to give voice to the experience of the people in this community, so there's more visibility. I take your point well, that communication might help victims come forward. But I'm also concerned that I don't know how much utility or how much we can push the law if people are, I mean, it's one thing to say, there's a law, you have to wear a seatbelt, so people will start to wear a seatbelt. But even if we have laws that are well written, says you can't hate, there's hatred. And I think as a commission, we need to think about how we can communicate and give people voice so that maybe people feel other people's hate, and and hopefully we can make some change. Is there something I'm missing in the legal aspect that we can do to?
Well, it sort of goes to the point that the Reverend was making earlier about feeling maybe more unsettled now than he felt earlier. Commissioner Stinger, we don't have laws against hate in the United States. We have the First Amendment, which allows people to say reprehensible, despicable, and vile things publicly and to one another and in all sorts of forums. And no one should think that hate crimes laws are laws against hate, because they're not. There are countries that are different, but the First Amendment provides the opportunity to say hateful, despicable things. But in the United States, you're not allowed to harm people. You're not allowed to threaten people. And appropriately, when you do those things, and it is because of a bias or a hate, as you would call it, then it deserves an enhancement, or what's known as a hate crime. So in order for there to be a hate crime, you have to have the crime, a battery, a vandalism, a rape. But then there's an enhancement which makes it a hate crime. And I think if there's something to feel maybe positive about, I used to do these trainings and I would have people say, this is just about political correctness, or this is just about the thought police. Why is a hate crime, why is your hate crime any worse than a bar fight? Both victims in those cases got a black eye. Why should a hate crime matter more? And what I always say is a hate crime is a crime against three. It's a crime against the victim who is injured. And it's also a crime against everyone else in the community who is like that victim, because it's sending a message to other people that are like that victim that you're not welcome here. We want you to be afraid. So that's the second way a hate crime is a crime against more than one person. And it's a crime against our country, because in the United States, we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to be free from violence. And when a crime is committed based on who you are, something that you cannot and should not have to change, it is a crime against the very foundation of our country. So that's why I'm pleased that I don't really hear too many people now saying we shouldn't even have hate crimes. I think the debate is shifted, and now we're talking about making sure that people actually report hate crimes and report hate incidents. And what I'm sure the task force is going to do, and what your letter references is people should call the police, call 911 when they feel threatened, make a report online so that statistics can be kept and we can identify trends. And that's very, very important. You know, we just had a rally outside of San Jose City Hall on Saturday, and there were 200 to 300 people there. And I think it's incredibly important, particularly now when we see these trends, for the public to see the media coverage and to see leaders and non-leaders, ordinary citizens, if you will, coming together to condemn. Because the voices of hundreds then drowns out the actions of the few that do these terrible things. So that's why it's really, really important for us to not sweep these things under the rug or to say, oh, if we publicize it, it's just going to attract more of it, right? Absolutely not. Every one of these horrible things that DDA West described is an opportunity for people, for all of us to come together and show unity for the values that really matter for all of us. That's why there is an HRC, right? That's why there's hate crimes laws. So I wish we didn't have to do these things. I wish we didn't have to have rallies in a perfect world, but human nature is human nature. There's hate. I mean, I'm not a reverend, but the reverend has probably said, you wouldn't know what love is if you didn't know what hate was, right? We just need to increase love and decrease hate.
I'm going to quote you this Sunday, DA. Like the DA said, I would say this, so I'm going to say it this Sunday.
Following the, I do have another question.
Can we do the loop around?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. I thought we were like 2 minutes. Sorry.
Commissioner Savage?
I'm a little shell-shocked, but you know, we've heard this list of hate crimes from last year and beginning of this year. Very sobering to hear that. It brings up serious concerns, just really shocking. And I think we're all feeling a little bit unsettled. And I agree that we do need to publicize this. It will create some unity. And I'm just wondering, you know, so far for this year, it is considered a trend, an unsettling trend. And what do you attribute to this? Is it just, well, I'd like to hear, you know, your thoughts about what's going on behind this. What do you attribute to some of these increases?
Well, thank you, Commissioner Savage. I don't know why we're seeing a trend, particularly the trend against Asian American Pacific Islanders, as much as we're seeing in the last few months. I don't know why that's happening in the last few months versus more than it was happening early on in the pandemic, particularly when there was more deaths and more fear and less known about the virus. So I don't know why that's happening right now. But what I do know from decades of doing this, and DDA West knows this too, is hate crimes tend to track the news. They tend to track what is happening in the greater society. And I'm talking, it goes back a long way. You remember in the recessions we had in the 70s and the 80s when there was a fear of Japan was going to take over the United States economy. There were then hate crime increases against Japanese people or people who were thought to be Japanese. When the initiative for marriage equality was on the ballot about 10 years ago, we saw a dramatic spike in terms of the trend of anti-LGBTQ hate crimes and hate incidents. And I've already made reference to the pandemic and the virus and what we're seeing there. So that's the best I have.
Yeah. All right, well, as you say, that's why the HRC is here. So we'll move from here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Regier.
I just want to thank you both for bringing some statistics to this. I've heard a lot of stories, so I feel not hopeful. So it's late. So, but I feel that this information that you gave us gives us some framework of we are the Human Relations Commission. We're not the Human Legal Society. We're not there to help the law. We're help people and serve people and get everybody together. And so I want to thank you both for kind of bringing this, because I remember it was a year ago in January, and I feel morally upset over this for myself because our other commissioner brought it up in January. And we kind of just surpassed it. And then the city council said, do a study of Black and Latino and people, and two city council members said, let's do Asian. And it wasn't put into that direction. So I thank you for bringing this up, because I think that it's something that we can work on, and I don't want to take any more time. I'm actually hopeful because I think the youth are seeing what's going on, and I think it's a wake-up call that we have a lot of work to do, that we're still not we're human beings that have a lot of faults, and we have a lot of work to do to bring humanity back.
Thank you for that comment. There are many reasons to be hopeful, and that is, for example, if you look at public opinion polls from younger people, the level of bias, prejudice, racism, sexism, homophobia that is displayed by people in this country who are younger is lower than it is for old people like me. And so I think that's a positive trend. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the dramatic movement that we've seen for criminal justice reform and Black Lives Matter after the murder of George Floyd, and you combine that ongoing the ongoing impact of all of that, along with the pandemic. It has been a historic and tumultuous year with the polarization and an election and all sorts of things. But I remember right after the insurrection, something that gave me a lot of hope is I saw Doris Kearns Goodwin, the historian, on the Today Show, and she said, we've been here before. We've had horrible things that have happened in this country, plenty of horrible things. And of course, those of us that know something about history know that what we're going through now is not an aberration. It is America, right? I mean, this is not something new. Do you want to talk about trends? There's negative things and then there's positive things, and they've always been with us. But working together, things will get better.
Thank you.
I just have one more question for you. What college were you in Santa Cruz?
Stevenson, Adelaide Stevenson.
Oh, okay. I just had to know, because I went to Santa Cruz. I was community made.
All right, Commissioner Thierry.
HRC, sorry to interrupt, Reverend, but we are the end of the line, as you said, right? It's a hate crime. It's a solved case. Our numbers are low. But in HRC, you're not constrained to deal with these technical legal elements. You can deal with hate incidents, which can be just as damaging, if not more damaging, than a hate crime. And that's what the HRC can do and does.
That's why we're here talking tonight, because we saw the pattern.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Commissioner Tiriel?
Yes, I want to thank both of you for coming and speaking to us tonight and educating us and giving us the structure, Jay, and then DDA West, thank you for telling us the cold hard sort of facts or stories of exactly what happened in all the incidents. I think that was very important, and as painful as it is to listen to those stories, it feels like those things need to be recounted. They were recounted in a very objective way, but I think that this is the kind of thing that needs to be out there and spoken about, that we must not look away. You know, we really need to look at these things and as painful as they are, try to figure out how we can move differently in our communities. I've been tracking this a little bit and seeing that in Oakland and in some other areas, there have been some like grassroots community efforts to protect Asian elders like within the community. So walking folks to the grocery store and just doing these sorts of things very informally and setting up Google spreadsheets to get people, you know, on track and volunteering to do this sort of thing. And that's really inspiring to me. And I think it's mostly within the community, but I wonder how, you know, Oakland is very different from Palo Alto, and we don't, different kinds of support may be needed, but I think it would be important for us to think about what that might look like and how we might try to move, and any suggestions are welcome, but I think that that's something that's very important for us to do as the HRC, is to be listening to what's going on and then thinking about how we can be proactive and really help make it okay to talk about these things and encourage, especially as you pointed out, because specifically the AAPI community is so underreported and so reluctant to report what's going on. I also just wanted to call out and wondered, I'm not sure what to make of this, but it seems like in some ways there's, I've seen some movements to bring together these different marginalized communities. So maybe the African-American community and the AAPI community, and make sure that that folks are not being pitted against each other, or that there's not more antipathy between the groups, because there has been some crime that has been Black on Asian. And so I guess I would be curious to know a little bit more about that and what your thoughts might be. And then also, I guess I would encourage the HRC, and if you had any counsel or any sort of advice for us, how we might do some deeper and more meaningful community building at an individual level, and also at the HRC and city level. And I'll end with one thought. You know, I post stuff on my social media accounts and try to bring attention to this. But, you know, it occurs to me that I have a lot of Asian American friends in the community here, and I signal through my posting, but then I wonder, like, why don't I just reach out and say, hey, how's your family? How is your parents doing? Have you guys had any? Because if there's a reluctance to report, then maybe it's helpful for me to reach out and ask and say, are you feeling unsafe? And has this been impacting you? And just open the door and make that effort to have folks be able to share more. Maybe there was a question in there somewhere that you might want to comment on. But
Well, I'm moved by everything you said. I agree with everything that you said. You know, take a look at that public service announcement. That was something that we did. I was sort of showing you that we had it. We had multiple languages. That one, the one I showed you, there were Chinese subtitles, Mandarin subtitles there. I would say my unsolicited advice is, yes, we need to reach out to targeted groups, and because those are the individuals, those are the groups that are in need. Currently, we're talking about AAPI. But in terms of your broader messaging, hate crimes are not about protecting minorities. And that, as if there's something wrong with protecting minorities, there's not. Hate crimes are about protecting all of us, protecting our very value system and our country. And no one should think that a hate crime that only white people commit hate crimes, only, I don't know, Jewish people or Black people are only, they're the only victims of hate crimes. It's not that simple. And if that's the messaging, it's just divisive, isn't it? What we need to talk about is love and inclusivity, and recognize that any of us could be a victim of a hate crime. And since all of us are human, any of us are capable of committing a hate crime, no matter our background, our ethnicity, our race, because we're human. And so, you know, sometimes you hear people say, or we say, well, that didn't happen around here. You know, that DA's office engaged in bad practices, you know, they convicted someone that was not guilty. Well, that wasn't around here, or that was in the South. That's not around here. No, we can't do that. And so we need to act, we need to think globally, but act locally, right? So Palo Alto is a wonderful, exceptional place, of course. We all care a great deal about it, but any notion that Palo Alto is somehow exempt or unique or not subject to the rules of human nature that we've seen throughout history would be a huge mistake. So again, thank you to the HRC for highlighting these issues. This is an issue for everybody.
So we have now time for public comment. Please raise your hand.
I'll just say before the public comment starts, I've known Aaron James for over 25 years. And so I'm sure he's going to have a comment, but yes, we go back a long way. And I know Aaron, we don't often agree about policy, but I know him to be a well-intentioned and kind-hearted human being.
Thank you so much.
So we'll just, okay.
Who are we going to start with, Aminka?
We are going to start with Aram James, to be followed by Kat Snyder and then Rebecca Eisenberg. So Aram, go ahead, please. You have 2 minutes.
You know, I'm really proud of Jay and Jeff. Jeff Rosen, Jay's friend and his boss, first Jewish American prosecutor in Santa Clara County. And I don't know, Jay, whether you were the first assistant Jewish prosecutor, but, you know, my dad was Daniel Ben Ezra Fink. And so, you know, he was an idiosyncratic Jewish person. When the task force issue came up on tasers, nobody wanted me near it. Jay suggested that I be the one presenter against tasers. So I love him deeply. I disagree strongly with the office's policy in prosecuting cops. I challenged him today, or Jeff Rosen, saying, look, if the victim of the dog attack was Jewish, the charge would have been filed yesterday, okay? The same thing goes with the Happy Donuts case, Mr. Alavalo. We still, the police, and I'm going to tell Jay, it's no surprise to him that him and Jeff are both in the pockets of law enforcement. They simply will not exercise prosecutorial discretion to file against bad cops. There's union problems. There's a fear of not being elected. And I want to give you an alternative book to read. Jay, you've probably read this book. It's by Angela J. Davis, not to be confused with Angela Y. Davis, who's also a warrior for justice and abolition of the criminal justice system. But it's called Arbitrary Justice, The Power of the American Prosecutor by Angela J. Davis. Black, first ran the public defender's office in DC and now is a professor, and she speaks brilliantly about the discriminatory exercise of prosecutorial discretion. If she was the prosecutor, or some of our other progressive prosecutors, they would be prosecuting these cops. And Jay, this is a conversation that we've had for a long time. I've written op-eds, and I love Jeff Rosen, but I've asked that he resign and be fired by the public and not reelected in 2022 because of his position. Wait, I'm not quite finished. I still have time here.
It's 2 minutes. It's 2 minutes.
Wait a minute. I want to correct you,
minutes.
Reverend Smith. My time wasn't up, and you jumped on me and interrupted. So
No.
You did?
No, actually.
I was watching the clock right here, bro. I was watching it right here. You cut me off.
I give you 10 more seconds. You got 10 seconds. 10 seconds.
Thank you.
Just take
So
10 seconds.
Jay, and I've met with Jeff Rosen, in several times to form a stronger police crimes unit. Jay, you know that. I've met with you guys on tasers. They listen to me, even though I have a very strong bias against law enforcement. So thank you very much, Jay. You presented extraordinarily well, as did Aaron West. Love you both.
Thank you so much.
And the next speaker is Kat Snyder, to be followed by Rebecca Eisenberg. Kat, go ahead, please. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, thank you. So during this whole discussion, I was listening to the part about the AAPI community underreporting, and it reminded me of something, an article I had read in NBC News, so I just skimmed that briefly. And that was talking about underreporting of pandemic-related situations and how there's pressures as a model minority to not make waves in certain aspects of shame that made them not report. You know, I need more financial help, I need mental health, and not reaching out for those reasons. And it also causes public officials, that model minority myth causes public officials to think everything's going okay. So it briefly mentions why people don't report hate crimes, but I thought I'd just forward the thing to you just in case it's a useful framework to use for your discussion. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Kat.
And last speaker is Rebecca Eisenberg. Rebecca, go ahead, please. You have 2 minutes.
So, underreporting is actually widely overreported. In other words, the more reliable and consistent recent studies show that the truth is that people do report. It's just that they are not believed, taken seriously, and the reports are not acted upon. My husband actually worked for Harvey Weinstein in 1990. During that time, my husband witnessed Harvey Weinstein assault and humiliate and harass women. He witnessed Harvey Weinstein throw ashtrays at employees, including my husband. Harvey Weinstein has been known to be an abusive, misogynistic jerk. And my husband reported it. Many people reported it. It took 25 years for anyone literally to care, or was it 30? Like, reporting is never enough when the people to whom a person is reporting mocks them, disbelieves them, calls them liars, claims they don't know what they're talking about, etc. Additionally, it is extraordinarily disappointing to hear Mr. Boyarsky misinterpret laws that include the laws that I helped write and get passed, in Congress about hate crimes. Most of all, I want to say that if you don't agree with Aaron James, what are you doing in that job? Do you care truly about justice? Do you care to punish wrongdoers? Do you care to reduce crime? Because here we have so much video evidence of cops who are harassing and assaulting and sending and purposely saying bite, aka dersh, to attack dogs to set them on innocent people, yet they always go without prosecution and punishment.
Thank you so much, Ms. Eisenberg.
And we have no more hands, Chair.
Okay. Commissioners, if you have no other thoughts, we have kept the nice DAs, which probably have court in the morning, but luckily everything's done by Zoom, so I don't have to drive too far. But we want to thank the District Attorney's Office for being here. And also want to, and if Chief is still here, I want to thank the police chief and the PD for being here, because it's obvious that this thing is very multifaceted, and we're going to make some recommendations. I think both presentations allow us to confidently make the recommendations that myself and Commissioner Turiel worked on, and I think this is just a beginning of a deeper conversation. There's some policy, there's some community, there's some there's some support stuff that we can do. I'm probably going to ask, I'll probably do some research on bringing in some groups to help us work on marginalized community that feel fair, and how do we reach them, impact them, how do we get them to report more. So there's a lot of work here to do, but I want to thank both of you for being here tonight. Commissioners, anything else? All three of you for being here tonight. I'm sorry. Commissioners, is there anything else you'd like to ask these nice gentlemen and this nice lady before they leave? Thank you. Thank you. All right. Let's move to the next item, which is the letter. I'm just going to ask for a motion on this letter. We made all the modifications, and I think I want to thank Sunita one more time for doing the work on this. She took all of the modifications and items. She noted everything, and she added research points to it, which I thought was phenomenal. I'll look for a motion now on the letter. I'll make the motion. How about that? I move that we send our letter as edited and in your packet to the City Council. Can I get a second?
I believe you would have to open it up for public comment before you start with motions.
I thought you, okay. Do we have any public comment on the letter, please?
Yes, I think we have one. So Mary, if you can get the clock up. We have one speaker. Aram, go ahead. You have 2 minutes, please.
I would really appreciate if you could link that letter out to me this evening. I'd like to review it. I'm extraordinarily appreciative of the efforts that the commissioners made to get this letter out. So it's important. I did want to bring to your attention, I'm sure you saw it, that Judge Cordell also did a really extensive professional memo this week on the 219 IPA report that also speaks to these hate crimes. So I'm hopeful that you all will digest that in substantial detail. As I said to Judge Cordell, how awesome to have a retired IPA reviewing our current IPA, both of who I've known for many years, like Jananko and Ladoris Cordell. And I did hear the chair say at the beginning of the meeting that there was the possibility that we were going to have some alternative community speakers on this subject, on hate crimes, including hate crimes by police. I don't know if that's correct, but I would appreciate if you all would announce that tonight to give the community the sense that you all are going to be balanced in these presentations, which the City Council has failed to do for so many years. They bring the cops on to do their PR campaign on how well they do with hate crimes, but never bring on the victims of police hate crimes. So I'm wondering if you could announce who those future speakers are going to be, Mr. Chair, and also about the linking of the hate crimes letter. Would you be able to send that out to me?
Yeah, the hate crimes letter, Aram, is linked to the agenda, but I can send it out to you separately tomorrow, but it is linked to the agenda.
I'm sorry, then I'll find it and review it myself. I appreciate that very much. Chair, if you could respond to my question, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Mr. James, we will have somebody from the African American and somebody from the Asian community organizations that have been dealing with hate crimes speak. I don't want to commit. I know we have the invitations out. We're waiting for the acceptances. And our intention is to have them speak probably at the next meeting, but I don't want to commit right now because I have not set agenda planning, and we have some big stuff that we're doing around housing next time. So, but we are going to have that discussion. The invitations go from there. All right.
Actually, Chair, we have one more speaker. So,
yes, please.
So Rebecca, you have 2 minutes. Go ahead, please.
I want to echo and reinforce what Aram said. and about the so-called other side, which I actually want to call the majority side or the more important side of the hate equation. And while I guess I appreciate you're looking for a speaker from the African American and Asian American community, it strikes me as close to impossible that you wouldn't be able to find a woman, which is the majority of our population. I think women are like 60% of the population in Palo Alto, which you can't tell by the leadership, of course. And women also are victims of hate crimes every day, every second, all the time, and including atrocious acts of hate by police. Women who are raped by police officers happens a lot more often than one might guess. This is why so many of us agree with cities that now don't have armed cops do traffic stops. There's never been a reason for that. But Palo Alto, again, is way behind the times with this. So I think you could find a woman. Also, a huge category is the LGBTQ IA+ community. I think it's truly only fair if you expand beyond, an Asian person and an African American person, whom I'm guessing would probably be defaulted to what is viewed in Palo Alto as the norm, even though it's not the quantitative norm, which is a man. So maybe try to find women for those roles too. Thank you for working harder on this. And I'm not going to swear, but I feel like it sometimes. So have a good night.
Thank you.
Ms. Eisenberg, we appreciate your comments. Thank you for participating. We really do appreciate them. All right, commissioners. I've got two. Let's do this letter. I want to just give the assignments, and then I want to do one last piece of business and ask if there are any commissioner reports. Let's see if we can accomplish this in 8 minutes. Ready? I move that we send this letter to the city council as in your packet. Do I have a second?
Second.
Letters up for discussion. Any discussion points? Yes, Commissioner Vergeer.
I would like to, I don't know how to amend, it's a friendly motion. I think it would be very important for us, because eventually you want to write a letter and put it in the newspaper. And I think maybe, I think maybe we should put it in the newspaper so that people know. I mean, I suggest that we submit it to the newspaper too for publish, to say this is what we're thinking, because a lot of times people read that more than they go to the city council.
I will send it. I will send it out.
So we need to admit it though. Yeah. So
I'll do the friendly amendment.
Okay.
You can just amend your motion, Chair.
Oh, that we send this to city council and local newspapers. That
I
will
want
be
to
my
thank you
amendment.
guys. That's all.
Thank you.
And were we going to?
Yes, yes, for sure. And the county. We're going to send it to county, city council, and local media. Does that count? Thank you. All right. Can I have a second on the motion? Yes, I did. Okay, it's time for votes. Time for votes.
Second. Oh.
It's time for votes. Commissioner Duterian.
Aye.
Commissioner Vergeer.
Aye.
Commissioner Savage.
Aye.
Commissioner Stinger.
Aye.
Commissioner Smith. Aye. Thank you so much, everybody, and thank you for participating in the process. We do have 2 more speakers that were supposed to speak tonight, but we showed wisdom and didn't invite them because we'd have been here till 1 in the morning, and we're not the city council. All right. I just need everybody to take a look at the assignments. We did this, everybody got their first choice, and then we assigned them to their second and third choice based on what we voted on. So ad hoc inclusion and belonging, that's myself and the vice chair. Inclusion, belonging, hate crimes and hate-based incidents, that's Commissioner Tirial, Commissioner Savage. Housing, Commissioner Regier and Commissioner Tirial. Public Health, Commissioner Savage and Commissioner Regier. We each have, I think I want to touch the only one that is currently not active and moving forward is public health, but I think we need to have a discussion with that. I was just on a call this afternoon with a couple of different union reps that represent teachers and others that work in a school system, and there seems to be a lot of mental stress on students, parents, XYZ, and they were highlighting that a lot. So maybe we should have a conversation before our next meeting about ways we can start looking at public health and the reopening and how do we best navigate that in this time. So, all right, we now have commissioners, wrong screen, sorry. We now are on commissioner reports. Do any commissioners have anything to report that we haven't heard? Okay, are we good? Staff? Valerie, you had something to report? Are you good? Okay.
Well, I think
Commissioner Regier, go.
No, I think Sunita raised her hand first.
Sunita? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. And this is my first commissioner report. I'm not sure it's a proper, this is what I'm supposed to do, but I wanted to mention that I went to that cleanup that was referred to earlier that happened with the Kiwanis Club, and a bunch of volunteers came to El Camino Real to work with the RV dweller family community and clean up. And I met with Evelyn of KSP, got a sense of what that organization is doing. Kafenia was there too, Collective for Peace by Mary Jane Marcus, headed by Mary Jane Marcus, just to start to get to know some of the issues. And I won't go into them tonight because I know we're trying to finish in the next few minutes, but I'll just share a very sweet anecdote. There was this thorough cleaning that was going on, including removal of leaves and any kind of litter to leave the space impeccable. And as we were closing down and collecting tables that were out for community delivery of services, one of the women who lived in the RVs, I speak some Spanish, so I was chatting with her and she showed me that in the area, so this area has these fences that separate Stanford from El Camino Real, and there's rose bushes along there. And so she showed me how she was a little bit disappointed and sad because she had some potatoes she had planted next to a rose bush and they had been pulled out by the volunteers as they were doing all the cleaning. She had some mint, she had green beans, and she was showing me all these sort of like incognito camouflaged things that she was growing. And I just wanted to, I really think that I'm inspired to get to know this community better. And I think that there's some real potential to relay these stories and share these stories. I mean, it's just a beautiful thing for folks to want to plant food and grow food. And it just gives an element of the humanity that's there and the desire for simple things to just have a little bit of earth to grow something in. And so I wanted to report that. And that's it. And I think that's an appropriate report, right? Because it's something to do with the HRC.
That is an amazing report. I read that actually is a good way to close out. Staff, nothing? Okay, good. Tentative agenda.
Wait.
Yes.
I did. I just gave Sunita because she raised her hand first.
I thought you were telling me Sunita the last time.
No,
okay,
she was. I also want to say thank you. I attended the Lunar New Year festival, and it was really, really fun. And I think that it was very intergenerational, different people of different groups, and what it did was they had dumpling making, and they had, and I think that was more of a way to bring people to. I just really enjoyed it, and I think it was useful to see a lot of young people, because I also was getting a lot of emails from people who had been experiencing what happened in Mountain View with the woman. And the other thing that I want to thank the city, because I was watching a lot of the next door about the cleanup, And so I'm on the zero waste committee for this, and the city was really trying to give bags and stuff for the parking lots and really trying to figure out a way to clean up that area too. I mean, around El Camino. So it saddened me that the complaints happened, but then people were cleaning up and it was cleaned. So I just want to say thank you to the city and also the community members. You're on mute.
Thank you so much. Let's see if I can remember all the promises I made tonight for agenda items, and then we're out of here. Dr. Mo Barrick had a letter that he wanted to have us look at. I want to put that as an agenda item for us to send to council next week, next time we meet. Yes.
I wasn't quite sure. He contacted me, and so I just suggested that he send it. Was that the right?
Oh yeah. We're going to review the letter. We're going to review the letter next meeting.
So I just thought that was a more powerful thing for him to get everything involved.
Yeah, I think it's the right thing. And he reached out to me on a couple of different formats. So I want to give everybody a chance to review what he wants us to support and sponsor. Number two, we will start our policy discussion about more practical and more humane ways and policies we want to recommend to the city as far as dealing with those that are having housing challenges. That will come from Commissioner Regier and Commissioner Theriault. Our goal there is to really start leading the conversation on what does it look like on a practical and policy side to give recommendations. And then finally, am I forgetting anything, Minka? Oh, we're bringing in our last two speakers for hate crimes, and we're bringing in community groups for that to get another perspective to hear from those that are experiencing and what communities are feeling about it. So those are the three things I have. If there's anything else we need to add, please let me know. Did I miss anything?
We always need to keep on the agenda, like the last one you had on tonight, that update on work plan items. So it allows those that are working on issues.
Thank you so much.
Report it back, but I interrupted the vice chair, so I'm sorry.
Community conversations. We're going to need a lot of help after. We'll be moving full steam ahead, and that'll be only one meeting before that'll be April, May. So that'll be one meeting before it really gets going. So we want to fill in on the commission with all of the details, or as many details as we have at that time.
Thank you.
All right. HRC, I want to thank each of you. You're doing, like, I can't say this enough. You're doing really good work. You're doing really, really good work. From the response of the Palo Alto Arts Commission to the district attorney talking about the strong letter that we all put together. You know, we didn't rush it out. We really worked on it, looked at it, to what we're talking about with housing and how we're impacting it. You're doing some strong work in this community, and I'm grateful for each of you. So next month we have one meeting, not two. Yes. And thank you all for pushing it through 10 hours of meetings in 2 weeks. You deserve a few weeks off. And thank you, staff, for hanging out with us. Everybody, have a good night. See. Oh, one last thing. University AME Zion Church is having vaccinations at our church on the fourth Saturday. On the fourth Saturday of the month. Fourth Saturday of the month. And don't require ID and don't require an appointment. Standard 65 and over, and anyone from between 16 and 65 with a level of comorbidities. We're really trying to reach those in the Black, brown population it's open to everybody, but those that usually wouldn't have technology, and it was good. So it was really good. So that's it.
So I have a question on that, Chairman Smith, on the, because on Bellhaven, for example, they were letting people, housekeepers, they had to be from Mateo County. So are you going strictly by the guidelines, or if people are?
So,
or maybe, I shouldn't
call
have
me,
even asked.
call me tomorrow.
I shouldn't have asked.
Call me tomorrow. Call me tomorrow. I can't.
I'm sorry.
We're working with the County of Santa Clara, and
yeah, so that's
all I'm going to
okay.
say is I'm working with the County of Santa Clara.
Thank you. So it's what time is it? From what time to what time?
It starts at 10 a.m. It goes to 3 p.m. And listen, we did a couple of things that are really, really critical. There are people that don't know how to use computers, and and they can't get on it. This is for them. There are people that have ID issues or don't have all the paperwork together. We really wanted to create a place in the North County that gave people the opportunity to get it. They don't have to go all the way down to San Jose to take advantage of services. So thank you, everybody.
Are you blanking people like Alviso did with the neighborhoods, like just giving them a piece of paper, or how are you notifying people that don't have computers?
I can print out and I can ask others to distribute. I've sent to a lot of social services and a lot of community organizations. And I'm printing some and going to like supermarkets and giving it to staff at supermarkets. So
great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner.
I wanted to say thank you, Chair Smith, for putting together what was a very long meeting, but was very fruitful and important, and went into some depth into some issues that were really important. So thank you for the work behind getting that set up.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. And we will talk later. Enjoy. Get some rest, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.